To the translators, do they still want it? Do the translators still want the presentation? How would I give it to them? No problem. Because it's in use.
Verdim, geri vermedi.
Okay. Which one is on? This one? And this one. What kind of stereo? Cool. Hello, I guess we can start pretty soon, huh? What do you think? Yeah? All right, I don't know which one am I supposed to use. Am I just supposed to stay between them somehow? This is kind of...
This one is more echo.
This one has more echo. Should we turn one off? Will that be better? Hello? Hello? Okay. Well, this one. Hi.
Work, yeah. Welcome everyone. This is the fourth piece of the seminar series that we have been organizing with DECOL, Akbank Sanat, Istanbul Technical University and Bilgi University, and with the contribution of Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton, and we have Dmytri Kleiner this month. I'm not going to make a long introduction for Dimitri. I suppose you know his work and you are familiar with his work. Today, Dimitri will make a presentation about miscommunication technologies. Welcome you all.
Oh, hey, there we go. Hi. I'm Dimitri. I'm based in Berlin. I'm with an arts collective called Telekommunisten, and we investigate the social relations embedded in communication technologies. And we do so by creating artworks that try to get people to interact in the way they might do in a network in order to raise discussions about the politics and other social implications of networks. And we do a lot of lectures, and we publish a lot of texts and things like that. So we're going to start with the artworks, and then we're going to go more heavily into theory, and then hopefully have a conversation with all of you. I'll try to speak slowly. I apologize in advance to the translators because I make up a lot of words, so they're not so easy to translate. So if you have any trouble understanding me, just tell me to slow down or ask me to repeat myself. I guess we've got enough time for everything. So yeah, so let me know if you're having any trouble following, and I'll try to go as slow as I can, although I tend to speak quickly. So there's a text that I wrote in 2010 called the Telekommunisten Manifesto. It was published by the Institute of Network Cultures in Amsterdam, which you can download for free, PDF version. There's various translations available, not in Turkish, as far as I know, though. But you can get a copy from our website or other places as well, from the INC, for instance. And the manifesto is sort of it's a good basic introduction to a lot of the principles that we talk about, including the topology of networks and the history of intellectual property and so forth. But before we go too far into that, let me show some of the artwork. So the artworks are always in reaction to kind of things that are being discussed, or things that are kind of common themes within the hacker and media arts community and information politics in general. So in no particular order, I've just opened a bunch of tabs to various artworks. I'll kind of just show you some of the materials, and we'll talk a little bit about what motivated us to make them. So this one is called White Save Me, and this is our most recent work. It was most recently presented at this year's Transmediale. And this work is in particular a reaction to kind of the what some people call the white savior industrial complex, which is kind of the Silicon Valley sort of attitude that they can make apps that will solve all of society's problems, right? Which and there's a number of problems with this approach. For one, that it sort of assumes that middle-class white people in Silicon Valley know what the world's problems are and have a good understanding of them, which is itself not so much true. And second of all, there's also all kinds of problems that come along with algorithms and the way algorithms see the world, and that as our lives are more determined by algorithms and our characters are more determined by algorithms, that creates a whole bunch of other kind of social problems because we get characterized in ways that we may not characterize ourselves, which may or may not give us access to certain things online. So in order to comment on those, we created this app, which is a video chat platform, kind of like Skype. You chat with one person chats with another person, but it attempts to detect your race to determine if you're white or not. And if you're not white, it puts you in touch with a white person, so the white person can tell you what to do, to tell you how to, like, solve your problems or whatever. So we have a nice promotional video for it here. So I'll play that. But what you have, I seem to periodically need to reconnect to the internet, so I don't know what. Yeah, it might be. 1 second. You get to also watch me play with my computer, which may be interesting. Oh, I do have internet. All right. Let's see if we can just get it off YouTube. Go to YouTube. Yeah, as I said, White Save Me is it's still available on. Yeah, no, I'm not on the internet. Sadly. 1 second. Let me reconnect to the internet. We'll try to get through the video part fast, so we don't have to do this as much as possible, and the rest is local. So, why is it not? Sorry about that. Just having a little bit of. Sadly, my computer cannot directly connect to this Wi-Fi because the Turkish letters crashed the Wi-Fi script. So the ESSID, but I have no idea why I'm not able to connect right now. 1 second. I was connecting earlier. It really was, I promise, I'm not making it up. It was connecting just 10 seconds ago. But now it doesn't want to anymore. Give me 1 more second and then we'll move on, no matter what. Almost there. I think I see the problem. Yay. Cool. Yay, internet. All right. So let's go back here and let's try that again. Oh, but now we don't have sound. Fun? It's kind of like, this is kind of like some kind of theater of torture. I'm sorry. This will go.
It's like a sound check.
Yeah, it's like a sound check, exactly. We did a bit of a sound check for some of the videos. I see the audio. Do you see it? That's audio going back and forth. But for some reason I can't. Don't know why the audio is not working. So let me try something here.
And as an introductory.
So I am sending audio. I think the problem is actually over there. Can we just try it again? See if we get audio. Ready? Oh. Yeah, see ya. So now it's just a question of levels. Okay, we're getting very close, really. This will all go faster soon.
What we can do is another option. We can share the videos after the talk on our Facebook event page,
Yeah, but
and they can check it later.
Let's just give it one more try, though, just to make sure, because it really is much more fun if we have the videos. Hmm? Is muted? Oh, actually on YouTube. Here? Okay, let's go again. No, oh, I see. So are we sending sound now? Yeah, I am sending sound. Yeah. Can we not get it over there? Okay. Sort of, okay, kind of, there we go. All right. This is gonna not be the greatest sound in the world.
All men are created equal.
Can you hear that?
Well, maybe not all men, but in the meantime, there's White Save Me, the app that delivers privilege to those most in need. Go to whitesave.me and click on Try It Now. This will launch the White Save Me app and your webcam. Turn on your camera. Make sure your lighting is adequate so that the White Save Me algorithm can correctly determine your whiteness. Based on your results, we will automatically match you via video chat with a partner to begin delivering privilege if you're white or accessing privilege if you're not white. End your chat at any time. White Save Me is the solution for addressing the privilege gap. It's easy, non-intrusive, and can even help make you a better person. Try White Save Me today. And as an introductory offer, non-white subscribers can speak with a white woman for 23% off. Just register using the promotional code PAYGAP.
So that actually really works. It's an online platform. I don't know how long we're going to keep it up for, but it's been exhibited a few times. And so this, so this is, as I said, it's for us quite an interesting work because it touches on a bunch of different things. It touches on the social inequality topic in general, but also this kind of this very kind of entrenched Silicon Valley attitude that simple, voluntary kind of capital market-based projects can really make big social change. And one of the core areas that Telekommunisten works on is that really social change comes from mass movements and from social struggle and from organization and from working in solidarity with activists and stuff like that. So we're always very, very suspicious of projects that think that they can make an app. Another interesting project I don't have a video for, which I'm sure you're all disappointed because we're not going to fiddle for another hour about it, but there'll be more videos later, is DeadSwap. So DeadSwap was, again, DeadSwap was a work that we did around the time of the original court actions against the Pirate Bay, and so the Pirate Bay was being under attack, and torrenting in general was being under attack, and so all kinds of people were talking about sort of decentralized file sharing systems and a way to defeat kind of the sorts of intellectual property legal system that was trying to stop everybody from sharing. And so we wanted to kind of make an artwork that commented on that, but it kind of was set in this sort of absolute worst case dystopia where the internet was completely untrustworthy, and the only way that you could really share information was with secret clandestine cells and with working with your groups of friends. So we created a platform called DeadSwap, which is a system of file sharing that was just using USB sticks like the ones shown here. All right, so there's so we would hide the USB sticks in public space, and then if you subscribed to a secret SMS gateway that you had to get through clandestine means, or you could run your own as well. The software was free. You could make your own clandestine cell with your own friends. But then once you had the phone number, you sent an SMS to it, and it would tell you where the USB stick was hidden in public space. And then you would go and find it. And once you had it, you would upload and download files from it on your computer, and then you would go hide it somewhere else in public space, and you would send another text message to the secret SMS gateway on where you had hidden it, and then that would be passed on to the next person that wanted the information. So it was completely absurd and very difficult to use, but highly secure if used correctly system. And this of course. Again, enabled us to create a discussion about copyright, about networks, about security, about operational security in particular, because another area that we have trouble with, not only like White Save Me, do we not like the kind of lack of politics in the sort of Silicon Valley solutionist kind of app, but we also even don't like the kind of attitude you find a lot in the hacker community that's all you need to do is give people a piece of software and they'll be safe. That's not actually true, because you can use software incorrectly. You have to know a lot about operational security, and you have to really understand what your threats are and stuff like that. So projects like DeadSwap allow us to talk about those things because they make them very easy to perceive. When you're talking about something that's a physical object hidden in public space, it becomes quite easy to understand what a possible threat model is. Like somebody could see you hiding it, somebody could hide it and then wait for you, right? So all these kinds of things when we're talking about computer and digital networks are very difficult to understand because you can't see them, become much easier to understand when you make them kind of physical and when you get the people to play out the network. And that's a common theme. That's a common theme in a lot of our works. Like, for instance, R15N. I have a video as well for this one. R15N was made during the Arab Spring and this era, and the themes that it explores were the themes around the kind of mass mobilizations in the Arab Spring and other parts of the other mass mobilizations that were attributed to Twitter. So people were talking about like Twitter revolutions and Facebook revolutions. And we wanted to bring the conversation back to actual organization and make the point that tools have been used forever, but actually it's activists that organize things on the ground that make things happen, not because of Twitter, right? So like in the Iranian Revolution, people were using like cassette tapes in order to spread information, but nobody called it the cassette tape revolution. And there's been there's people who have used cookies, like in China there were people were using cookies during the Han Dynasty to spread revolutionary message inside of mooncakes, but nobody ever called it the mooncake revolution, right? It was people use tools, but it's actually the organizational efforts that activists make that cause the revolutions, not the existence of things like Twitter or Facebook, even if they can be convenient at times. So we created a platform called R15N, and the idea was to use the same kind of language in order to kind of advertise this platform, like that was a community building platform. Let me play a promotional video that we used at the time. 1 second.
R15N will help you get your message out. Go to R15N, sign in. Push the button on the R15N website, and you'll be connected to a random person from your community. R15N will then create an ad hoc telephone tree connecting random community members. As the community works together to spread the message, R15N creates community engagement. There's no charge to you or your community. Try R15N today. The revolutionization of communication.
And so essentially we used a very, very old technique called a telephone tree, which is something that like growing up in Canada, your school would use if there was a snow day and the school was closed. They would like call two parents, and those parents would call two parents, and those parents would call two parents, until the whole community knew that they shouldn't send their kids to school that day because there was a snow day. And so we made kind of an automated version of this and kind of tried to present it as a revolutionary new mobilization platform in order to kind of like get your message out in your community. So in the exhibition you'd see the phone number, you'd connect to the phone number, and then you could go to the website or send a text message and initiate a new message. And all that would happen was that the system would phone you and just connect you to a random person that was also subscribed, and then you would have to tell that person the actual message that you were trying to distribute, and then that was it. And then they would be called by a random person, and they'd have to pass on your message, and then so on and so forth until the community got the whole message. And so what ends up happening is, of course, is the whole thing just results in like confusion, and you're constantly harassed by these like kind of these constant phone messages, and nobody ever really knows what's going on or who's giving a message and who's receiving a message. And so this kind of tries to emphasize that it's more difficult than it looks like to like just organize a revolution. That you really need to have people be focused and diligent and be on message. And I think this is actually really fun work. It's also work that has really different impact in different areas. Like in places where telephone using is really expensive, people don't mind being harassed so much because they actually find it fun to talk to random people on the telephone. Right, so like in Johannesburg and in Israel, where like we were working in poor neighborhoods that don't their telephone time is really expensive, people really liked getting phone calls from random people. But in Paris, people really hated it. They were like terrorized by it. They were like, "Make this thing stop! Turn it off!" All right, and another one is Number Station. So Number Station was a response to the kind of post WikiLeaks, post Snowden kind of, all of a sudden everybody's really interested in like cryptography and like the kind of like the Star Wars concept of activism, where a few plucky activists blow up Death Star and stuff like that, right? So everybody was really into being a secret agent, and so we thought that we'd make a platform for running your own spy network, right? So that you could have like, you know, you can send messages out to the field. And because we like to use very old technologies, we made a number station, which is a Cold War era kind of like technology, where a station would just broadcast numbers, and we handed out decoder cards so that people could listen for the numbers and like decode and get the secret messages. And this also has a promotional video, more of a training video actually. I mean, hopefully the internet is still working. We'll see. Oh, it is working.
This short film will familiarize
Do you hear me?
with
Do you hear this?
technique you will need to participate in the trusted
Can you-
network. Visit telekommunisten.net/numbers to find out how to tune into the number station. Number stations repeat messages day and night. When you hear the card identification code for one of the cards in your possession, get your pad ready to interpret the code. Follow the scheme as indicated by the voice.
0, 8, 1, 1, 6, 1, 2, 8, 4, 3, 6, 4, 4, B, 4, 5, 6, 4, 6, 6, 4, 7, 6, 3, 8, 6, 2, 9, 8, 1, 8, B, 1, B, 6, 1, 6, 6, 1, D, 8, 4, 0, 8, 1, 1, 6, 1, 2, 8, 4, 3, 6, 4, 4, B, 4, 5, 6, 4, 6, B, 4.
Mod 10. Decipher the phone number to call for further instructions. Congratulations. You have completed the first phase of your training. Welcome to the numbers community.
And this is also an interesting piece to exhibit because it's quite invisible, right? It's only in the air and on cards. So we just leave cards around in the gallery space, and then there's some way to get the audio. Either it's on FM or on the internet. There's some way that the audio is transmitted, but it's not. It's a very kind of almost invisible work, and that's also kind of not an accident because the year before we did this work here. Which was a very, very large and physically imposing work that we've exhibited several times. It's called Octo, and so the idea here is we were trying to problematize a lot of the discourse around immaterial labor. So there's if you a lot of the internet discourse starts with the idea that that the labor on the internet is kind of immaterial. And we also wanted to talk about centralization, right? So we wanted to make this kind of very, very physical representation of a centralized network and kind of show not only, help people understand how networks work, so they understand what centralization is, but also like that. I'll try to like make the labor and the infrastructure tangible, because the internet is far from immaterial. It uses lots of energy and lots of labor. It's all over the world. It's got cables and data centers and all those things are built from mines, and it's a very, very, very physical apparatus. That it's just all behind your screens. You don't see it beyond your own local computers. We wanted to make that kind of very, very visible. So we installed this at the Haus der Kultur der Welt. It's a giant installation that went all through the building, and we've done it several times since. You can see other photos of it in various places. We usually use the yellow cable, but sometimes we've also used other colors, black cables. So you see we've done it across streets and in cities, and it's essentially a pneumatic post system. But it's made with drainage pipes and vacuum cleaners, so it's kind of like a DIY kind of system. And when we present it, we typically kind of present it as if we were sort of like a startup that wants to kind of capture all physical distribution, the way that online platforms try to capture all digital distribution, and we pretend that we're just at the festival looking for investors. Right? So we made a video to help get investors. I hope you like it. So we're always kind of emphasizing those themes like domination and like centralization and control in the website that is made for the investors. We talk about things like deep capsule inspection to ensure that we know who's sending who to what, and we can provide accurate data. In the more recent versions of it, we have like a control app that is required to use the system, so we can control who sends who to what. It's also being the system's also been taken up by the Chaos Communication Club, the Chaos Computer Club at the Chaos Communication Congress, and they call it Zeidenstraße, and so it's also been at the last 3 CCCs, including the camp. So it's Octo is kind of like spreading everywhere because it's a lot of fun because it's very physical and loud and big and visually impressive. But it's also a really great way to talk about networks because it makes them, like the U.S. politician once said, it makes them into a series of tubes, right? And another one is, so again, old technologies are something that we emphasize, that we use very often because we want to kind of problematize this idea of that modern technology is always claiming to be something that's very new, right? It's so and oftentimes it actually isn't very new, or it doesn't really have very new dimensions. And so Thimble is kind of like a perennial work of ours because this kind of delusion seems to come up a lot. But every so often there's a lot of excitement around some new alternative social network, and that social network is usually very much like existing social networks, but because it's not an existing social network with excitement, not because it's free software or it's federated or something positive about it, makes people believe that it's going to be that it's going to be different. And so we try, we always emphasize that actually it's modes of production, capitalism, and politics that make it different, which we'll go into in detail in a minute once we start the second part of the presentation. But Thimble tries to sort of demonstrate that in a kind of humorous way. And so what we did with Thimble was we made a microblogging platform, kind of like Twitter, but we made it using a protocol from the 1970s called Thimble, which was called Finger rather, which was the kind of original in early internet way of doing status updates. So by using a protocol from the 1970s, we're kind of showing that it's not these ideas that are new, right? And the reason that things are not decentralized or not free is not because no one ever thought of it. It's because there's political and economic forces that control the centralization of things. So here's a promotional video that we made for Thimble, if the internet still works. Let's see. Yay. And it was actually implemented by a lot of people. That we had those Ruby clients and Python clients for it, and it's just even though it was just kind of a humorous system, and it's very impractical because it's based on 1970s technology. It makes assumptions like you have private IP addresses and stuff like that, which almost nobody does. But it created a lot of discussion, and it's still often referenced when people talk about alternative social networks and alternative social models. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of artwork that we do. It's much more fun to actually interact with them in gallery spaces and exhibitions than it is to just watch them on TV. But the main reason that we do these things is because we see the kind of the space of art and the space of culture as a space of intervention and dialogue. And so we like to introduce these kinds of absurd communication platforms in these spaces so we can have serious discussion about the political economy of information and politics broadly, politics in general. And so we're going to talk about that now in a little talk called Mr. Peel Goes to Cyberspace. It's also a title of a text that will be published of mine soon. And it talks about kind of resisting digital colonialism. So a lot of discussion around privacy and online is tied to ideas of kind of like centralization. So there's a story, and I like the story very much as well, that the internet in the original days in the mid-90s was very decentralized, was based on technologies that weren't owned by anyone, that were based on open source and free software, things like Usenet, email, Finger, IRC, and other technologies that were used, and that this kind of was more than just a technological thing. It was really kind of inspiring a lot of people that this would lead to a whole new society, like people like John Perry Barlow and the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, and a lot of us were really kind of inspired because we thought that if we could have a communication platform that was not based on hierarchy and exclusion, that was open and accessible, that this would not only allow us to communicate different, but actually would result in a whole different society. That institutions would change, that corporations would lose their power, states would lose their ability to control, people would be able to communicate with each other directly and overcome all kinds of institutions and hierarchies that are preventing them from realizing the sort of social change and social development that they wanted to experience. This was sometimes called disintermediation, which is one of the many terms that we'll get into in a minute. The idea that the internet would disintermediate our society. And sadly, that didn't happen the way that we expected. Not only did it not happen, but the internet became quite the opposite. It became the most censored and surveying and exclusionary platform in history. Right? It's now rather than being this kind of emancipatory peer-to-peer platform, most people understand the internet now as something that is constantly spying on you, that's completely controlled by corporations, that's giving governments access to your personal details, and that's completely driven by advertising, and it's the complete opposite of what we imagined in the mid-90s of this emancipatory system to be, and so really to kind of figure out what we're going to do about it, how we're going to react to this. I think it's important to understand how this happened. So how the internet changed from being this very distributed visionary platform to this panopticon, this thing that we can't control and that's constantly watching us. And I think that's one interesting way to look at it is to use kind of the economics of colonization. And so this is called Mr. Peel Goes to Cyberspace. Who is Mr. Peel? In chapter 33 of Capital, Marx recounts from E.G. Wakefield. I think Edward Gibbon Wakefield, I think is the guy's name. He's a politician from the UK that was kind of a theorist of colonization. He helped define the kind of economic principles behind successful colonization, right? And Mr. Wakefield tells the story of Mr. Peel. Mr. Peel is an aspiring capitalist, and he goes to Swan River, Australia, and he brings with him £50,000, which I guess at that time was a huge sum of money, and he brings 300 people with him, men, women, children. So he has everything that he needs: money, workers, reproductive workers, children, everything. He's got everything that an aspiring capitalist might want. But once he arrived at his destination, Mr. Peel was left without a servant to make his bed or fetch him water from the river. So his plan didn't really quite work out because in Australia at the time there was a lot of just open available land. And so the people that he brought with him just simply left him and went and started creating their own lives and livelihoods on the open land that was widely available in Australia at the time. And so he found that his £50,000 was not useful anymore, and his great capitalist dreams were shattered. Right. So what Mr. Peel discovered was that capital is not a thing, but a social relationships between persons established by the instrumentality of things. Right. So unhappy Mr. Peel, who provided for everything except the export of the English mode of production to Swan River. So in Swan River, the English mode of production didn't exist. So there was nothing compelling the 300 people that he brought with him to sell their labor to him and become workers in his plantation or his enterprises. So he wasn't able to be successful, right? So property and money, means of subsistence, machines and other means of production do not as yet stamp a man a capitalist, if there be wanting the correlative, the wage worker, the other man who is compelled to sell himself of his own free will. That's also from chapter 33 of Capital, right? So just having money and things doesn't make you a capitalist. You need the other person. You need the person that has no choice but to sell you their labor in order to actually engage in the capitalist form of production. If you don't have that other person, then you can't be a capitalist. And with all the free land available in Australia, there was nothing compelling the other people to sell their labor to poor unfortunate Mr. Peel. Right. So this is a very important passage here. The means of production and subsistence, while they remain the property of the immediate producer, are not capital. Right. So long as the immediate producer is employing the means of production, they're not capital, right? So if you're using wealth and machines yourself in your own production, that is not capitalism. For capitalism to occur, you have to have the other person. You have to have the wage worker that is compelled to sell you their labor because they have no other choice, right? Right. And so Mr. Wakefield developed the idea of systemic colonization. So this was the reaction of the capitalist class to this problem of the colonies, where as Mr. Wakefield put in other texts, that there's not enough labor because there's no reason for the workers to sell the labor to the capitalists, so the capitalists can't get labor, so they can't develop their enterprises. So Mr. Wakefield solved this problem. He said, what if the government just said all the land belonged to them, and then only sold it at very, very, very high prices, way above its market value by law? Then nobody that wasn't already rich could buy land, and without land, they would be compelled to sell their labor to the capitalists. And this is the economic logic of colonization. This is how it works. So the government first claims all the land as public, but doesn't allow anybody to use it except if they pay a lot of money for it. And because only rich people can pay a lot of money for it, everybody else is compelled then to sell their labor to the capitalists. So this is how the English mode of production was recreated in Australia and New Zealand and other places, including the USA. And so if we go back to our peer-to-peer kind of distributed, decentralized internet, we kind of have the same problem. How am I gonna make money running internet services if everybody can run internet services, right? If everybody can have access to the equipment and the networks required to operate internet services, then poor Mr. Peel once again has no way to engage to build a capitalist business, right? So here we have digital colonization. We have a different strategy that was developed by Hal Varian, called the Varian Plan, other people as well, Carl Shapiro. And the way that was accomplished was that decentralized platforms were replaced with centralized platforms. So all the funding that was building internet-based applications stopped going to things like email, Finger, Usenet, and all started going to things like Facebook, Twitter, centralized things, right? So and these centralized things began to operate in the same way that centralizing land ownership did in the colonies, form of digital colonization, where you have the capitalist that sets themselves in between people to allow them to now make a profit. And when we think about what to do about it, we have to think in political terms. This is not a technical solution. This is why a lot of the Telekommunisten artworks kind of make light at these kind of technical solutions of trying to solve these problems, because we're talking about our political problems, right? So, as Lucy Parsons famously said, never be deceived that the rich will permit you to vote away their wealth, right? This is not a question of simply voting away centralization or changing everything by the way we do it. We have to. It's a political struggle. So it's a political question, right? So ours is the political challenge as well as a technical challenge. So if we're interested in building a network, building a communication platform that doesn't survey, that doesn't exclude, that's anonymous, that's private, we have to understand this is not merely a technical problem, but also a political challenge. And right. So here's Hal Varian himself. So Hal Varian is kind of one of the E.G. Wakefields of the internet. He's one of the theorists that has helped companies like Google and Facebook and stuff like that develop their social media monopolies. He wrote a book in the 90s called Information Rules, and he's currently the chief economist of a small search engine called Google that has quite successfully created a business model in this internet, which was formerly distributed, right? And this is a very interesting quote from Hal Varian that I would like to understand how we can believe this, given the nature of what he does. And it starts with the point of consent, and I think consent is a really good starting point, because I think that if we're talking about privacy, anonymity, and all these kinds of characteristics of networks, it's not so much privacy that people want, it's consent, right? Some people may want to be very promiscuous with their data, or at various times differently. What you want is control. And here Mr. Varian agrees. He says, I do not in general want them to share this information with third parties, at least without my consent. The issue is not privacy per se, but rather trust. Consumers want to know how information about them is used, right? And how many people know how Google is using your information? You probably don't. Right. So centralized platforms require control of user interaction and capture of user data in order to generate profit. Right. So mandatory sacrifice of consent is required to use the platform. So this is quite contrary to what Hal Varian is saying here, because if he's saying that consent should be the kind of basis of data collection and data sharing, then this is very contrary to the reality of using online platforms today, where if you're using Facebook or Google or stuff like that, a mandatory sacrifice of consent is required to use the platform. You have a terms of services that say that they're allowed to share their information with their business partners. We know from the Snowden revelations that they're happy to share that information with with intelligence agencies. So in order to use the platform, you have to kind of mandatorily give up consent. Right. What do we do about it? And this is kind of the area of theory that the Telekommunisten has been working in for a long time. We've developed a lot of different kind of concepts and strategies, and I'll try to go over some of them today and try to explain to you what they mean and why they're needed to confront privacy violation, to confront surveillance and censorship and that sort of thing, right? So if we start off with the idea of consensual systems, consent requires privacy, because even if privacy is not what you want at all times, in order to give you the choice, then the network has to be able to give you assurances of privacy so you can choose to have it or not, right? So the network has to be designed in such a way that the user is able to control how much privacy they want, right? And privacy requires what we call anti-disintermediation, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail. It's a very long word. We think it's the longest word in the English language, actually, which I'm not sure if that'll help us or not, but it's a noteworthy thing. And it starts with this idea of disintermediation. So like in the 90s, when we were all using Usenet and Finger and IRC, we believed that this was going to disintermediate everything, remove the intermediaries, right? But what we didn't really quite understand is that, or we didn't fully understand yet, is there were anti-disintermediationists. There were people who worked for powerful interests who didn't want things to be disintermediated, who wanted the big institutions, the government agencies, to remain in charge and remain in control. So they develop theories and practices called anti-disintermediation. Mr. Halvarian being one of the major theorists of such practices, or if anti-disintermediation is too big of a word, you can just think of it as digital colonization, right? So in order to create privacy-respecting networks, we have to first deal with the strategies of the anti-disintermediationists. So we need counter anti-disintermediation, right? And counter anti-disintermediation is, of course, specifically necessary because it confronts capitalist business practices, right? So that means that the capitalists won't fund it, right? So we can't expect Silicon Valley venture capital or any kind of capitalist investors to fund counter anti-disintermediation. So we need something. So if we can't use venture capitalism, then we need venture communism, right? We need some kind of an alternative way of organizing that's based around cooperation and sharing rather than investors and profit. Otherwise, we can't build counter anti-disintermediation, without which we can't have privacy. Right? And so venture communism requires transvestment. I won't talk too much about that in this talk, so this is just a little bit. But transvestment comes from some of the work that we've done in the areas of macroeconomics, and so there's kind of, just to explain that as shortly as possible. Very classically in the left, there's kind of this sequentialist idea. You see it in Lenin, you see it in a lot of places, where first we had feudalism. Then we had the bourgeois revolutions, where the capitalists smashed feudalism, and then we're going to have the workers' revolutions, where we smash the bourgeois state and make the workers' state, and then the workers' state will wither away, and we'll have communism, right? So you have this kind of like neat sequence of things, but we don't really subscribe to that kind of neat sequence of stuff. The way we like to see things is that all modes of production that are possible, given a certain set of social conditions, are happening, and they're happening in parallel. So if we rewind that story, if we go back to the feudalism that was smashed by the bourgeois revolutions, you have to understand that capitalism already existed within feudalism. Otherwise, it could not have built institutions that were big and strong enough to smash the feudal system. So revolutions don't happen when a mode of production is born. They happen when a mode of production contends for dominance, right? And so if you look at it that way, then you start to think of modes of production that are happening at the same time. So at all given times, we have feudalism, we have capitalism, we have communism, and we have every other possible combination of ways to produce and share, because that's all a mode of production is. A mode of production is a way of producing and sharing things, right? And there's certain things we produce and share in our lives that we do so under capitalist terms. There's certain things we produce and share that we do so under communist terms. We have all kinds of ways of producing and sharing in our lives, right? So really, to the kind of the revolutionary thinking would be to how can we increase the sort of sphere of the modes of production that we think are beneficial, and how can we decrease the kinds that we think are harmful or exploitive or not beneficial, right? And so this is where so we've got this idea of transvestment. So just like in macro models, you have sectors, right? So you have like the public sector, the private sector, and the foreign sector. We treat modes as sectors as well. So in our macroeconomics, you have the private sector, the public sector, the foreign sector, but also for each mode. And so flows of value between modes, when one way of producing and sharing that was formerly done in another mode gets done in a new mode, we call that transvestment. And like I said, we won't talk about too much about that today, because that starts to get into macroeconomic identities, and that would take us away from the internet. But it's required, because in order to build other ways of sustaining networks, we need ways to have value to sustain those networks. So they need, people need food, shelter, etc., and that has to come from somewhere. So funds has to come from one sector to another sector, right? And transvestment requires technological disobedience, and this is from an artistic point of view and from an activist point of view, one of the most interesting and important and fun kind of terms. So what's meant here is that technology comes from industry, and that industry is focused on making profit, and it has an interest in having you use that technology in a certain way, right? And so if you use the technology in the way that the industry wants you to use it, then all the value will be captured by the industry, right? You won't, but there's leftover value in technology that can be still captured. So the term was actually coined by a Cuban American artist called Ernesto Orozco, and he documents the way that technology is used in Cuba, because Cuba's been subject to an international embargo for a very long time. So technology is very hard to come by there, right? So because they can't just simply import it and buy it. So they just can't simply replace a piece of technology anytime they want. So they have a whole culture of repairing and recycling and hacking and modding, where machines are used for much longer than they were intended to use by the original manufacturers, where they're used in different ways, in ways that weren't intended by the manufacturers, and where parts from one machine they're unrelated are being used to fix another machine that they were never meant to be used to fix. And so this is technological disobedience. And in this way, we can draw a lot more value out of technology than we were intended to, right? And so Hal Varian, even the anti-disintermediationist, talks about this as the monopoly of durable goods. So he's advising the IT industry, and he's advising the IT industry to make them think of the equipment you already have as a monopoly of durable goods that has to be competed against, right? So once a computer company, for instance, or a telephone company has sold you a telephone or a telephone computer, from that point on, they think of that as competition. So their old phone or your old phone or your old laptop is competition to that company because they want to sell you a new phone or a new laptop, right? And so that keeps the value flowing to capitalists. And if we want to start to cut off that value, then we need to keep that phone and that laptop longer than what they want and get more value out of it. And technological disobedience requires counter-politics, and counter-politics is another quite important concept that we like to make. Unfortunately, in the activist community, at least in the West, and in the hacker community, there's this idea that we can build everything from the ground up, and therefore there's a reluctance to engage in any kind of like mass institutional politics, where like we saw that in the Occupy movement, where they constantly insisted that they had no demands of the state, and they refused to participate in any kind of like electoral politics, right? And this sort of comes from another kind of classic schism in the left, the schism between reformism and revolutionary politics, which I'm sure many of you encountered, where certain sects are accusing other sects of being either reformist or revolutionary, right? So this comes from the idea that the only way to achieve a new society is to kind of capture the state and impose the new society from the top down. When again, this from the point of view of Telekommunisten doesn't really seem like a viable option. It hasn't really worked so well in history. Not that we like to make historical arguments, but it hasn't really worked so well in history, and it also seems unlikely, because it seems kind of like a chicken and egg problem. In order to have the power to take the state, you already have to have a certain level of kind of maturity. So we don't see the goal of engaging with institutions as being to take the state and impose a new society from the top down. Rather, we see the need to engage with social institutions to protect the conditions and benefits of workers today, so that they have the wealth and the conditions that they need to build the new society from the ground up. So we see them as being very much together. That it's not a question of reform or revolution. It's a question of if these things are not done together in concert, both will fail. That we need both at once. And in order to sort of describe that, we talk about counter politics. So instead of like politics proper, we think of it as counter politics. Right, so here we are, disintermediation, anti-disintermediation, counter anti-disintermediation. I guess we've already gone over those terms, so you guys know what I'm talking about. So disintermediation is the process of removing power from central institutions by creating disintermediated platforms that allow people to work together, whether it's for production and sharing in a mode of production kind of sense, or for any other kind of social interaction. Anti-disintermediation is a strategy that powerful vested interests use in order to stop disintermediation, and counter anti-disintermediation is what we need to develop in order to counteract the losses that we've already experienced to anti-disintermediation. And so disintermediation requires the end-to-end principle. The end-to-end principle is sort of like one of the core features of computer science and one of the core design principles of the internet itself. So when we're talking about the internet, we're talking about a protocol called TCP/IP, Internet Protocol. An Internet Protocol was designed to be end-to-end, which means that all functionality is meant to reside in the end nodes. So if you imagine that practically, like if you think about a system like Facebook, then all the functionality resides on their servers, right? So you're just connecting with your web browser to a server, and so are your friends. And all of your communication is passing through Facebook. So every time you're sharing a message or every time you're doing any kind of interaction with the platform, it's the functionality is on the platform, right? Whereas in the end-to-end principle is something where the software works on your own computer. So I have software that runs on my computer, you have software that runs on your computer, and all of the functionality goes between our two computers without anything in the middle except for IP, Internet Protocol, which allows data to flow end-to-end with no intermediaries, right? And the end-to-end principle in computer science is understood to be the only possible architecture that can be privacy respecting, censorship resisting, and scalable, right? So a lot of these kinds of early 90s or mid 90s utopian kind of phrases, like when John Gilmore famously said that the internet understands censorship as damage and routes around it. The only way that he can make claims like that, because he was talking about the end-to-end principle, he was talking about Usenet specifically, and so he was talking about decentralized systems. If you're talking about the modern internet, that's obviously not true. Censorship is very, very easy and obviously easy to implement on platforms like Facebook and Twitter because they're centralized, right? So disintermediation depends on the end-to-end principle. Right? But unfortunately, profit requires centralization. So it's exactly the end-to-end principle that the anti-disintermediationist needed to attack. So just like Mr. Peel had a problem with the open land in Australia and couldn't really kick off the process of capitalist colonialization so long as there was open land available. The first thing the capitalists had to do to colonize the internet was to remove the possibility of end-to-end communications and force you to depend on centralized resources, right? Resources that could be owned and financed by capital, right? And so long as they have to, and so long as they, and because only those centralized resources can allow them to capture profit. Because in order for them to capture profit, they have to control your user interaction. So if I can't charge you a price for something if I can't get in the middle of it, I can't sell your data to somebody if I can't collect it. And the only way that I can do those things is if I have a centralized platform that I force you to use. And actually, it's quite interesting that it didn't take the internet for the capitalists to realize this. This is what they were trying to build all along. In parallel to the internet, which came out of kind of military funding and public institutions, there was a whole nother idea of what the online world would look like that was being built by capitalism. Probably not too many people here remember them, but they were called things like CompuServe, Prodigy, and the first versions of AOL before AOL became itself an internet service. And these were exactly centralized and designed to be completely controlled by the center node, right? They were architecturally defeated by capitalism, by the internet, because the internet was peer-to-peer. But then as soon as capital was refocused on the internet, they needed to centralize things again, right? So this is why they applied anti-disintermediation. So here's Mr. Varian again, as I said, the E.J. Wakefield of the internet, and he's talking about lock-in, right? So since information technology products work in a system, switching any single product can cost users dearly. The lock-in that results from such switching costs confers a huge competitive advantage to firms that manage their installed base of customers effectively. One of the things that Hal Varian as an example is like the fax machine, right? It's like if you only have one fax machine, if you're the only person in the world with a fax machine, it's quite useless to have a fax machine, right? No, in order for a fax machine to be useful to you, you need other people to have fax machines so you can send them faxes, right? So if you exclusively own the fax machine market, you want to have many people own them, and so this is an example of a network effect. And this is also the same with Facebook. If you're the only person on Facebook, then Facebook isn't really very valuable. But if everybody you know is on Facebook, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more valuable, and it becomes difficult to switch. So once a new social network comes along, and you're the only person on it, then it doesn't have much value. So in order to have that new social network also be valuable, you have to have a lot of people on it. So this is what he calls switching costs, right? So the cost of switching from Facebook to Facebook 2 would be high. So there has to be a lot of value into it. So that means the owners of Facebook 1 have a very strong market position because of that lock-in. And lock-in is one of the major strategies of what I'm calling the principles of anti-disintermediation, right? And you can find these in authors like Varian and Shapiro, other kinds of people that are advising the industry. They're advising the companies like Facebook and Google, right? Price discrimination, lock-in, proprietary APIs, penetration pricing, and the monopoly of durable goods. We've mentioned a couple of these already. So price discrimination is of course charging people differently, and that is something that requires data. So for a good example of how price discrimination works is, and also why it's so, and why surveillance is so important to platforms is like, when talking about a platform like Facebook is media, right? So a media company, you're not the customer, right? You're not the customer of the media company, right? The media, like just like you're not the customer of a television network or whatever, right? Corporations that produce media, their customers are advertisers. That's who they work for. That's who they're selling things to. They're selling things to advertisers. And what they're selling is audience. So that's what Dallas Smythe, for instance, calls the audience commodity, right? So what the business model of things like Facebook are is to collect audience and to sell them as a commodity, the audience commodity, right? And commodities in general are sold by grade and measure. Like if you go to the store and you buy eggs, you buy like a certain volume of eggs, a certain measure of eggs at a certain quality, like grade A or grade B, right? And audience commodity, like all other commodities, are also sold by grade and measure. So it's so in order to maximize the traffic that they get, Facebook doesn't just sell each individual audience member equally any more than any other commodity vendor does. They have to discriminate. They have to discriminate what your click is worth and what your click is worth and what your click is worth. And they do so by the demographics, right? So they do so by dividing the user base into like age, income, race, car ownership, credit card ownership, other kinds of aspects that are called the demographics. And this is why surveillance is required for the platform, because if they're selling audience commodity, in order to most efficiently get a return on that audience commodity, they need to discriminate the pricing. In order to discriminate the pricing, they need to spy on everybody. So like in a lot of the early criticisms of Facebook and Google, people seem to project that it was kind of like just an oversight or a bug. Like somehow these systems had a different business model, but due to mistakes in engineering, there was all this surveillance. But actually, if you understand the business model of media, it hasn't changed since commercial radio. It's been the same. It's been the same the entire time. You understand that surveillance is a core feature of the product. It's why these platforms exist. That's why they were built, and that's why they were funded, right? In order to spy on their users for the purposes of price discrimination. We've talked about lock-in already, proprietary APIs. So instead of the free and open protocols of internet, when you have proprietary APIs, people then become dependent on your service. Penetration pricing is another lovely anti-disintermediationist concept, because if you're talking about a community project or a volunteer group, they have to bootstrap. So they have to have enough money to pay their own servers and workers and offices or whatever. They have to be able to afford to deliver the service. When you're talking about a venture capitalist funded service, they get millions and millions of dollars up front before they make any money in order to capture markets later on. So they can do something called penetration pricing, which essentially means pricing well below cost in order to capture markets before, other organizations that are using different principles can't compete. And then we've already talked about the monopoly of durable goods, meaning that you're not allowed to use your iPhone for more than 2 years because that iPhone is competition for Apple's next phone. So these are the principles of anti-disintermediation that we have to confront if we want to create counter anti-disintermediation. Right, so what are the principles of counter anti-disintermediation, right? So here we have things like end-to-end, from each to each, technological disobedience, and counter politics. These are the kinds of approaches that we need to take to our projects and we need to support in order to confront anti-disintermediation or digital colonialism. Right, and because capitalism is the problem, right? The real problem and the real reason that we have surveillance and exclusion is not because of bad decisions by engineers of Facebook, but because of the real material conditions that they're operating in. So the actual problem is that we're not designing communication platforms to fulfill human needs. We're designing them in order to capture profits, and the kinds of designs that are required to capture profits are completely different from the kind of designs that are needed to generate social value, right? So we need a society where productive capacities are directed towards social value and not profit in order to really change things. It's not just a technological challenge, but it's a challenge of how do we direct our productive capacity as a society. And so we also have to understand that when we're talking about the monopoly of durable goods, that it's not just an economic question. It's also a moral, political, and ecological question, because the supply chains of technology are extremely bloody and poisonous, right? So if you look at how computers and microchips and telephones are made, and you look at their supply chains, they're based on war and blood and exploitation. Like the people that mine the minerals that are used to make cell phone screens are literally doing so under gunpoint at various times, right? So the working conditions that are involved in technological supply chain are very extremely bloody, right? So it's actually more than a simple economic motivation to use the technology that we have as long as we can, but it's actually a moral and environmental one as well, because there's a huge moral and environmental cost that's already embedded in the technology you already have, and when you throw it out, you're paying a much more than an economic cost, but also an ecological and a moral cost as well. So this is kind of what we mean when we say venture communism. We say, what we would like to see and participate in is networks of federated cooperatives employing technological disobedience to build counter anti-disintermediationist platforms that support counter politics. Right. This is kind of the combination of things, and we give them quirky names to make them more fun to talk about. But I think the politics of it is also something that hasn't fundamentally changed for hundreds of years, right? We need workers' organizations. We need people to organize towards changing things, and our ability to achieve those changes is depending completely on the cooperation and strength of those movements, and not on any technological details that are necessary only to realize what those movements can realize if they're organized. Right, and so the key points are from these architects that server-based platforms are impossible, right? Because if you look at things like, I don't know if you guys know StatusNet or Diaspora or other kinds of platforms that are often presented as alternatives to the internet, they still require some kind of a server. Like your community has to have a server, and then everybody in your community uses that server. So use that server instead of Facebook. But unfortunately, that server requires upkeep as well. Somebody has to pay the bandwidth cost, somebody has to pay the electricity, and somebody has to pay the hosting fees, and then somebody has to be able to maintain it, do security updates, fix it when it's broken, right? So it requires upkeep. And what's worse is the scaling property is such that the more people that use it, the more those costs get. Right, so it becomes very difficult to scale. So if your community does decide we're not using Facebook, we're going to set up our own diaspora node, then the more people in your community that use that node, the more those costs rise, right? And then you have to have a funding model. How are we going to pay these costs, right? And then that's when, at a certain point of scale, capital becomes your only option, and so capitalism captures it. In other essays, I've said that capitalism gathers on the intermediary nodes in the same way that mold gathers on leaky pipes, right? Like once we create these intermediaries, like the financial pressure causes capitalism to kind of congeal around them. Right, but end-to-end is possible because if the software is running on my computer and your computer, then a third person or a fourth person or a fifth person joining our network actually only gives our network more resources, not less resources. So they become scalable, right? So when we make end-to-end software, we don't require any kind of central servers. We still require the work of the software design, the UX, of those software, but that's kind of like the fixed costs of developing the software. The marginal costs become almost nil because once everybody has the software and everybody's using it and the software works end to end, meaning my computer talks directly to the other computers, right? There's no way that you can use any kind of software if you don't already have a computer. So the one thing we can assume is that all the users will already have their own computer, right? So it's the CPU and the memory and the network access that's already present in the user's computer that we want to architect the network around. It has to be architected around only those resources because that's the only way that we can really then scale and escape the anti-disintermediation trap. I can only say that word about 20 times before I stop being able to say it. Right? And so that's one of our slogans, no servers, no admins. Really quick way, really easy way to understand if you're going in the wrong direction. If there's servers and admins, then it's the wrong model. Right? And and once again, we have to build them with technological disobedience. So we have to encourage people to use like Orson and I were talking yesterday about the $0 laptop. That's the $0 laptop, which is a great project. I guess from the early 2000s, right? Like or the mid 2000s. That was first proposed. But the idea is that there's a certain kind of laptop that you can always get for free because it's the kind of laptop that's no longer wanted by people that are in business or in the offices, right? But it's actually quite powerful technology if you're able to use it, and not everybody has to go down to that level of disobedience. But it's kind of a good thing to keep in mind that we need to be able to use technology for much longer than it was intended to in a much different way, which requires hacking, modding, and recycling. So for all the people that are like thinking of signing up for like a learn to code class, forget it. Don't learn to code. We don't need you to code. We got plenty of coders. We need you to learn how to build your own computer, install your own operating system, get your own software, like connect to the network. That's what we need you to know how to do, because that's the stuff that's going to empower you to use a disobedient way. If you want to learn how to code as well, that's cool, but not necessary. Right? So, I guess. Right, and we must direct our economic power and organization towards counter politics, because if we don't work with the existing movements that are focused around education, healthcare, childcare, housing, then we can't create the conditions. We can't create the social conditions to build what we want, because we can't build anything if we don't have those things. If we don't have food, housing, healthcare, water, shelter, then we can't build communication platforms of any kind. So counterpolitics means confronting existing social institutions to protect social conditions, right? And that means working with and very closely with actual existing social movements that are working to protect those conditions, and actually also even in the kind of platforms we make, thinking about what kind of platforms do these movements need, right? What kind of platforms do these movements need to do what they do, and to have more social more impact. And I guess that's probably enough. There's a lot more if you want me to go into other details or areas I haven't covered, but I think we'll stop there before you guys all fall asleep on me. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Especially for the last part, we need to understand the other social movements are totally related with digital colonial project, and we need to build platforms to develop and to help their struggle. So I open up the discussion for those who would like to ask or make any comments if you want. Really.
You can ask your questions in Turkish.
They can, tercüme yapabiliyorlar ona kulağına.
I have headphones. I can get.
Merhabalar.
Just let me see how this works. Another technology that's gonna. What channel is this working on? Yes.
Lisan, buradaki bütün kurgu bilginin merkezleşmesi ve o merkezinde kontrolünün bizde olmaması. Ama burada bir problem bence yani bilginin merkeze doğru akması aynı zamanda bilgiyi artıran bir şey. Ve bilginin tutarlılığını da teyit ettiğimiz bir durum. Dolayısıyla bunu decentralize yani ya da işte merkez bir tek noktadan dışında birçok noktada bilgiyi tuttuğumuzda hem o bilgiye olan şüphemiz artacak hem de bilginin büyümesi dediğimiz noktada merkeze doğru akması engellenmiş olacak ki o da başka bir sonuç yaratacak. Bu konuda ne düşünüyorsunuz?
I haven't. Can we? I don't hear. I heard like 2 words and then I don't hear anything anymore.
Really?
Oh, I hear you again now, though.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't hear you. Can you just summarize it? Sorry, I didn't hear it. Can you
I can try in English.
or you can repeat the question and she'll translate it again.
I can't trust my English, but the problem is, my opinion is, or you are pointing that to here, is that the communication or knowledge centralization and restrictions about to this centralization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in our hand, the government or some other organization, PowerPoint, can control that, and it's you are your subject around it. I see, or I understood.
You're against that.
Yeah, my point is, capital of information is, or the information goes to one capital, is support to increasing of the information.
Increasing the power of it.
And also there's a second thing is to this we can be sure about this information is right or wrong, or prove, maybe we can say we can trust about that, because of lots of people talking about and arguing about that, and we can say, yeah, that can be true, let's go there. But in your presentation, it's when you decentralize of this information point, that can be suspicious about that, you know. So, and also the knowledge increasing can be goes down.
Let me take this off for a second. I'm not really sure that centralization of the communication platform has to do with the reliability of the data, because the source of the information is already kind of distributed, right? If you look at where does information come from on Facebook or even Wikipedia, it comes from a whole bunch of different areas. So if we had software that worked according to the end-to-end principle and worked locally, it would still come from a lot of different people. So from that point of view, it's not so much a big difference. However, if you're looking at something like a university or an institution that's presenting knowledge, right now, for that university to be able to like maintain that knowledge, they'd have to be able to support the whole world going there, right? And they can't do that because they don't have a business model like Google or Facebook or even Wikipedia in order to do that, right? So a decentralized architecture would actually enable a trustworthy institution like a university to be able to like have their information reach more people. Does that make sense?
One point. But this trustworthy, how can we, it depends on our knowledge of about the subject, So on the other hand, so we can't trust that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's it's not really something that's determined by the architecture. It's determined by how the information is produced and where it's like who it's produced by, right? Whether it's produced by random people like on Facebook, or whether it's produced by journalists or academics or people you trust, or however you trust the creators of the information. The architecture of the system should still be such that that information is not required to be controlled by a central point. Does that make sense? Because you can still authenticate that it's from that source, even if it's decentralized. Right? It doesn't have to be put onto a central server, and just to be reliably from one organization or person. Right?
Does this work? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dimitri. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have a question to ask you about software licenses and about copy far left. I mean, you've done a lot of work about this, and your work has been taken up by people like Michel Bauwens and Vassilis Kostakis. It has been criticized also by people like Christian Fuchs. So how does the concept of like software licensing fit into all of what you've just described so far?
So licensing is, of course, just a convenient way to create terms under which things are distributed, right? Just like creating a license doesn't mean that the work is supported or they have any resources to make that work. So the reason I made the copy far left license is because of the problematic nature of the Creative Commons non-commercial license. So it's not actually intended to be a software license. For software licensing, I'm quite satisfied with the GPL and various free software licenses, right? So the reason that I wanted to create the copy far left license is because there was this whole community of artists, some of which you may know, like Cory Doctorow, Wu Ming, and other kinds of people that were making like great cultural works, but using a non-commercial license, which means that those works were unavailable for other producers to reuse and share. And because I believe in a culture that's cooperative and collaborative, and I believe that a commons has to be a productive commons, that it can't be kind of a hands-off kind of commons that you can only be a consumer of, but you should be able to become a producer as well. I wanted to create a license that they could use too, and the condition and they're in a different situation than software developers, right? Because software developers, and I am one, we're able to create free software because by and large the people that are paying us are not selling software. They're operating platforms or delivering services, so they don't mind if the software that we write is based upon free software, because that just helps them more efficiently deliver the services that they're trying to deliver. They're not selling licenses, right? But if you're looking at a publisher, so if you're Wu Ming or if you're Cory Doctorow or Jim Monroe or any of the free culture authors, and you're talking to a publisher, then the publisher is only interested in paying you for the license for that book. So if they're not able to sell a license, then they're also not able to have that sort of career, right? Which some people think that is not a good career, that they have a different career, they should support themselves in other ways, but that's a different argument, right? But for them to be able to survive as professional authors, they have to be able to sell non-free terms to publishers. So that's why the copy far left license expressly uses the non-commercial clause from the Creative Commons license, but expressly gives the right to reproduce to non-capitalist uses. So people that do not have shareholders, there's no profits being dispersed to shareholders, right? So individuals, cooperatives, any form of organization that cannot be captured by shares and has no dividends and things like that, doesn't have the capitalist form, and that's the reason for the that's the reason for the peer production license, and that's the reason it's created. It's for people that need to that want to contribute to free culture, but at the same time make their living by selling non-free terms to existing corporations like publishing companies.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the presentation. I think we've seen a lot of good examples of what's wrong in capitalistic system. You gave a lot of good examples of the companies that work on that centralized mechanism. Can you now instead give some good examples of the contrary that we'd like to see? For example, some companies that actually utilize the counter anti-disintermediation practices. So obviously, we can't escape the capitalistic structures around us. So I believe there's no company that embraces 100% those practices. Yeah. But I'd like to, get some examples from you that are in the, right direction. For example, maybe Elo, which is a benefit company. I think which is again, I think a benefit company, but they are producing peer-to-peer chat app. Right. Maybe GitLab. I don't know. So can you give us some good examples that we can look up to?
In terms of software, there's lots of great examples. Of course, Git and all the various Git-based things, including GitLab and GOGS, and are all fantastic from a software architecture point of view, as is things like Tor and BitTorrent. In terms of companies, I think that this is one of the bigger challenges. It's not clear to me how these companies would be able to face the penetration pricing from the competition, right? Some companies like Elo, which on one hand has there's good aspects of the model, that they're a for-benefit company and stuff. On the other hand, they're exactly the kind of cargo cult server-based platform that we know is going to fail, right? Because we know, because anti-disintermediation was exactly designed to defeat companies like Elo, right? So there's absolutely zero reason to believe that they will succeed, despite the fact that they're a for-benefit organization, which is a good part, right? So I would like to see something like Elo, in terms of being a for-benefit corporation, but that has an actual end-to-end architecture that makes software that runs on people's computers that communicates together. And so there's not really too many companies like that. There's some very small ones, like for instance IPFS, which is a company that's seeking to make an interplanetary file system. That I'm not really sure what their business model is in particular, but I think that their software approach is quite interesting, in that it's distributed. So the idea is that everybody gives a little bit of their hard disk space to the interplanetary file system, and then we all have a shared, resilient, distributed file system, which would be a cool thing. Other things like ZeroNet are another a similar idea for a web platform that's fully distributed based on the end-to-end. There's a very nice microblogging project called SSB Patchwork, and the SSB part stands for Secure Scuttlebutt, which is another similar to IPFS distributed file system strategy. I haven't really seen all of this really come together as as a company that can really drive it forward. So far the two biggest success stories in free software are Red Hat and WordPress, right? And in both those cases, they work on a hosting and support model. So they work on the fact that they give away their software for free in order to create demand for their hosting and support, right? Both those companies work in that way, and that's been quite successful for Red Hat. They're now a $2 billion company, right? And I think WordPress is like $300 million, something like that. So like it's also not small, but not the scale of Red Hat. But that is not really such a great model. It's an okay model, but it's not gonna create a really distributed social media platform. This is why I don't think that what we're calling for is actually really in existence. And in particular, I would like to see a greater degree of cooperation between activist organizations and like kind of like technology innovation groups like hackerspaces and hacker groups to help build this kinds of things. I don't really think that the profit motive is going to get us there, even if in certain cases there's certainly allies that we can have from normal businesses. I said Red Hat, WordPress, IPFS are all companies that I would consider doing good work and allies, but I don't think that the profit motive is what's going to enable us to really build these kind of systems. I think there has to be social motives, and I think that they really have to come from activist groups, from academic groups, from artist groups, from groups that are directed towards social issues and that are mobilizing around social issues, not around finding ways to make money.
I think we have another question.
Before we finish, I think I would add OwnCloud as well to this list.
OwnCloud, yeah.
It's a good one, I think. It's an alternative to Dropbox in general, if you guys don't know about it. Yes, I think support systems really help these, if companies survive in a way. I want to add maybe a comment on this general topic, especially the last one. So we kind of assume that network-based systems by default, end-to-end especially, are, say, democratic. I think this is an assumption. I don't completely believe in this. One reason is because there is this network effect issue. I tried to broaden this a few times in other platforms before, but I think I'm interested in your opinion about this. Because as we know, the first mover in any network will definitely dominate, at least aggregate some power within that network structure. If this is a file system, the ones who moves, who shared first. If this is a, I know, a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency, Bitcoin-like system, then the people who invested first will gather more power over time, and so on and so forth. There's this one issue, that's the network effect. And the second, I think, issue with network-based systems is the authoring of the protocol that runs the network itself, right? Who not owns it, who writes it, and how much collaborative is it? How much consensus-based it is? These are the questions we should always ask to any end-to-end system in general. And so maybe you can address some of those ideas.
I completely agree. That's why I always phase the problems as being social and political problems, not technical problems. We have to start from the social and political problems we're trying to address, and then we arrive at the technical details that we need to implement them as a consequence of those things. I don't think that the technology is the solution in and of itself. It's going to be part of the solution to the degree that we're organized and mobilized around addressing social and political issues.
Okay, then. We wrap up. Thank you once again for being with us, Dimitri. We will have another talk on the 25th of April, on Monday at 6:30. We will be more talking about on algorithmic regulation and data-driven networks. We will be with the artistic practices of Salvatore Iocanesi and Oriana Persico next month. I hope we see you next month then. Thank you.
Thank you all.